Hello and welcome to County Board Wrap Up, our deep dive into the big issues from this month's County Board meeting. I'm your host, Kara O'Donnell, and you may notice that while board meetings are back in person in session, we're still virtual here on County Board Wrap. That's because we're making a few tech improvements in the studio, but we plan to be back there as well very soon. However, we are making a few changes in the format here on County Board Wrap, giving you, our viewers, a chance to engage a bit more with the discussions. We'll get into that a little bit later, but first, here's your 60-second board wrap-up. The board approved requests to advertise public hearings for collective bargaining, prevailing wage, an ordinance to reduce speed limits on certain county roadways, and numerous other items at its regular meeting. It also made the decision to defer action on a proposal to rename Lee Highway until July to take time to get additional public feedback and revised cost estimates. The board approved several development projects throughout the county, including ones at the RCA site on North Moore Street in Roslyn, an amendment to the Clarendon West project, and a new 496-unit residential building with ground floor retail in the Potomac Yard neighborhood called Potomac Yard Land Bay C East, Hazel National Landing. And the board approved the addition of a new farmers market for the county. It will start in July at the Dorothyham Middle School in Cherrydale. You can find details on these and other actions from this month's board meeting at arlingtonva.us. Searching County Board. And that is your 60-second board wrap-up. When we come back, we'll be joined by our board chair, Matt DeFerranti, as well as board member Christian Dorsey, for a look at the big story from the June board meeting, the move to rename Lee Highway. Stay with us. Welcome back to County Board Wrap-Up and this month's big story, which is the potential renaming of Lee Highway here in Arlington. I am joined now by Board Chair Matt DeFerranti as well as Board Member Christian Dorsey. Now, we had a lot of discussion from the public at this month's board meeting on the pros and cons of renaming Lee Highway into Langston Boulevard, which was the name brought forth by the Lee Highway Working Group. But let's start off, let's take a few steps back. And for those who may not be aware of some of the story, can you give us a little bit of background on why the move was made to consider renaming Lee Highway in the first place?
Sure, Kara. There's a number of factors. This has been discussed for some time, but really I think we've seen over the past 2 or 3 years a change in our country and a heightened awareness in our community of what the name Lee Highway means. We've seen first that Robert E. Lee made a fundamental choice, which is anathema to a lot of the values that we as a community want to be all about. And that was his defining choice to work towards a Virginia that at the time was inhumane towards our fellow Americans. And so over the last couple of years, there's been heightened conversations, but this has been something we've recognized for some time. And I suppose a couple of actions and the way that things have occurred, there was the change in the name to Richmond Highway from Jefferson Davis, which Mr. Dorsey led the board at that time. And then there's also the changing of the name Washington and Liberty High School from Washington and Lee. There's also been some changes in the direction that the state as a whole is going in, and that is relevant, as is, I think, the racial reckoning that followed the murder of George Floyd. And, you know, if you think about how I was taught about Robert E. Lee 30 years ago when I was in Virginia public schools, just across from Fairfax County, it was that, he made a choice, he was loyal to his state. That history, we now all know, if we're paying attention, was wrong and racist. And we need now to align our place names with our values, and that's what this step is about. So a step forward that we started last month. We all fully anticipate taking the final steps next month. And we should also talk a little bit, maybe, Christian, you can talk a little bit about there's legislative change in Richmond that made this possible. So that's my perspective. Christian, I don't know if you had thoughts to add there.
Well, so many, Matt, and that was really terrific. And I know that, whether it's Robert E. Lee or even a little bit with Jefferson Davis or the whole host of Confederate memorials and monuments and places in our country, what we typically hear from people is, well, I'm a little concerned that you're looking to rewrite or erase history. And I appreciate engaging with people on that, because there have been historians who've spilled lots of ink talking about Robert E. Lee. And there will probably be people who are steadfast in belief that, it's not evil to have him on places of honor. I don't want to have that debate. I want to look at when they decided to name Route 29 Lee Highway. You got to remember that that was a road that existed before that. It was the Georgetown Road and the Falls Church Road and the Little Falls Road. It wasn't always designated as Robert E. Lee Highway. That came not in 1866 or 1867 or 1897. It came in 1922 during a national movement to seek to rewrite history, as if it wasn't that the Confederacy wasn't about upholding the institution of slavery, as if the Confederacy had actually prevailed. So we saw movements to create a Jefferson Davis Highway, successful, a Lee Highway, successful, all during a period where our country sought to reclaim the narrative, rewrite the history of the 19th century, so that we would have this reimposition of Confederates on public places throughout the United States. And that is fundamentally objectionable to my modern eye. So I don't even mean to get into the debate about Robert E. Lee. Let's look at what was the legislative intent at the time. And I think we can hopefully all agree that we reject that. And that's what I think the General Assembly did. They didn't want to say that, it's got to be named this over Robert E. Lee. They didn't get into that debate. They said at the end of the day, the community, the citizens of Arlington, have the right to determine what their road is called. And that's a principle that I can support.
Now, this is a discussion that then came before the Lee Highway Alliance that developed a specific working group to look at renaming. Can you tell me a little bit about the name that they eventually came forth with, Langston Boulevard?
Sure. Well, John M. Langston was the first Black congressperson elected from Virginia and has a link to Arlington in that he was the administrator for the Freedmen's Bureau and spent time in Freedmen's Village. So those links are very important, and really appreciate the work of this Lee Highway Alliance working group. They'll also, I understand, likely rename, but they were thorough. They did a lot of community engagement, and I think that community engagement has played a strong role in, we didn't have anyone testify at our first conversation in opposition to this change. And I understand there are going to be some who have concerns about the cost. But for me, the work that they did in getting community engagement, and then they were thorough about the names that they brought forward. And John M. Langston, we might initially have preferred the Loving name, which is a very important case, Richard Loving in the 1967 Supreme Court case. But we wanted to be respectful of the family there. And luckily, our Lee Highway Working Group had been thorough and had come with this second name. So John M. Langston, the more that I learn about the history there, the more pleased I am with the direction we're headed. Even, first blush, it makes sense. The more you learn about him, the more excited I am that we're changing this, and not only changing the first part of it, but from highway to boulevard, which we think is going to have a beneficial impact on how we look at the street and businesses engage, and also that there's a little more of a pedestrian-friendly piece to this entire stretch of this critical road in our community. So I'm looking forward to it, and we're certainly, out of an abundance of caution, we wanted to have a first conversation and then a next conversation so that all of the concerns can be raised before we take action in July.
Let's talk about that because, this came before the board at the June meeting. However, the manager's office recommended or staff recommended, and you chose to accept those recommendations and actually defer adoption until July. What went into that decision to actually defer making this adoption?
Well, this is one I think, Christian, I'd love to hear your thoughts because it is the manager, but it is, the board was also involved in this conversation. And Christian, over to you.
Even though it sounds like, we've got it all figured out and where everything is ready to wrap up in a neat little bow, there is still a little bit of work that we need to do. Part of which is just the dimensions of the road itself. It's actually not one linear straight Route 29. We've got a couple of places where it's namely highway, so we have to coordinate with the Virginia Department of Transportation on how we're going to treat that particular section. We've got a nice recommendation that we're working towards, but final agreement has yet to receive dotting of the I's and crossing of the T's. And then we also realized one of the ways in which the legislature allowed localities to make these changes on their own initiative was to also require them to bear all of the costs for updating signage. And as you know, Route 29 is not just a thoroughfare through Arlington. It is one that is immediately accessible via off-ramps from I-66. So there is actually a substantial amount of signage that needs to be updated, changed, to effectuate this name change. And we don't quite yet know how much it's going to cost. And, one of the principles that I think we all have is that we are not going to commit to an action until we can be very clear and transparent about what it's going to take and how much it's going to cost. So we just need a little bit more time to get that all in a row, I think, before we're ready to truly have a public hearing when we're able to answer any and all questions and concerns about this issue.
And then just to kind of wrap up, symbolically, what would the renaming of this thoroughfare mean for the county?
Well, I think on that one, I'll have brief thoughts, but and I don't know that I've quite expressed it this way, but and then I want to send it to you, Christian, of course. But the more that I learned in college about the actual history of our country, you learned about that there's multiple different challenges in our country, and one was the inaction in the period of slavery of moderates who acted as though they were good people but didn't act for humanity of all Americans at that early stage, and then further all the way through, candidly, the civil rights movement, when we saw not just very radical, terrible groups, but also moderates not stepping up. And this is different. But in some sense, I feel like our country and our county are moving to a place, and this is just my honest thought, to a place where you have to stand for racial justice, at least be actively anti-racism. And I think that this name change, because the principal legacy for me of Robert E. Lee is so linked to a fundamental decision that I disagree with to my core, I think this is a way that we're changing a symbol to look forward to a different history. And we can still learn about Robert E. Lee, of course, but do so in a context that is more inclusive than ever. So that's maybe more than a few words, but that's my honest take on the symbol. And Christian, I know you'll have thoughts too.
And, there's a healthy debate about this very question throughout our community. And I'll say for me, I do view this as symbolic. When we effectuate this name change, it will not improve anyone's wages. The quality of their job won't give them better access to health care. It won't improve their life outcomes, not a whit at all. And for many people of color who have endured elements of discrimination and racism that are far more concrete than what the name of a road they may travel on, this is probably not even going to change the trajectory of their psychological outlook. However, that doesn't mean it's not important to do. When you have the opportunity, when you gain the opportunity to do the right thing, passing on that opportunity is problematic. And we have that opportunity. We have engaged our community. We've done everything the right way. And for us not to follow through and proceed would be the wrong thing to do. And so, for me, I don't think you don't ever fail, no matter how significant or insignificant, in doing the right thing. And this is a chance for us to do the right thing. And even if someone views this symbol and it gives them inspiration to seek justice in another way, that's more than enough. But let's not allow the fact that this will not change the world prevent us from just doing the right thing.
Okay, well, we will leave it there. I can't think of a better way to wrap up that topic. But of course, there was plenty more to discuss from this month's board meeting, and that's where we're now turning to you, the viewers. We're going to answer your questions on some of the hot issues and let you know how you can participate in the discussion when we come right back. Welcome back to County Board Wrap-Up. I'm Kara O'Donnell, and I'm joined today by County Board Chair Matt DiFerrante and Board Member Christian Dorsey. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we are changing things up a bit here on County Board Wrap-Up, and we're opening things up to you, the viewers, about any deeper dive questions you might have from this month's meeting. We've received some questions about other items from the board meeting, and if you have questions for us, just drop us an email at countyboardwrap@arlingtonva.us, and then we're going to get to as many of those questions as we can. We're going to start off, though. We've received quite a lot of communications and questions with regards to the proposed ordinance on implementing collective bargaining here in Arlington County government. The state recently allowed for collective bargaining at the local level, and the board voted to authorize advertisement of a public hearing on the matter in July. Now, gentlemen, our first question is pretty simple. Who qualifies for the collective bargaining and who doesn't? What kinds of things are included in this proposal for collective bargaining?
Sure, Kara. So we've got, of our county employees, we've got police, fire, both qualify. General government employees qualify. There are some exceptions. So, for example, the county board office and what's called confidential employees, often at the management level, don't qualify. But big picture, it's about 2/3 to 3/4 of our employees qualify. And the purpose of this is the subject that this covers is wages and working conditions. And really, it's a way of making that partnership, strengthening a partnership between the county leadership and our employees as a whole. And so we think it's a step forward. That's why we took the initial step last week. And we're looking forward to enacting it in July. If you look at where there's the greatest governance so often across the world and across the United States, I feel that it's where you have a genuine partnership between management and labor working together. And that's not to say that every last subject will be part of the collective bargaining agreement we eventually enact. But this is a step forward in terms of making sure we're valuing those who work with us. And that, I think, is critical. It's perhaps one of the lessons of the pandemic, that we need a greater commitment to our frontline workers and a greater commitment to those who are really what makes the county strong in terms of addressing customer service. So we had a May 1st opportunity. We're thoughtfully moving forward. We had an initial conversation in our meeting over the past week, and we're looking forward to July. We'll have additional conversation then, but that's the big picture, at least as I see it.
And then under this agreement, would the benefits then apply to all employees or just those who join the union? And would eligible employees be required to join the union if this motion passes?
So, no employee can be compelled to join a union. Effectively what this would do, and I know that this is probably new to a lot of Arlington employees because we haven't had collective bargaining in our county since the 1970s. And, of course, Virginia has notoriously been a state that has been resistant to organized labor. But fundamentally, you have the right to join a union, participate in its activities, decide on its priorities, engage in the ability to either be a leader within your particular work area or to be involved in negotiating benefits on behalf of all employees. But those benefits do accrue to everyone, regardless of whether they take the step to join the union or not. From us on the county side for management, we just allow for the opportunity for there to be representatives. We engage in good faith with those representatives, and the benefits accrue to everyone.
Okay, and then we did also receive some communication regarding the prevailing wage, basically a very basic. What does this prevailing wage measure mean, and why is it being considered now?
You want me to take that one, Matt, or you want to go for it?
Well, I'll give it a shot, and then certainly I know you would add, of course, but we have it is initially when I learned of the term, I was like prevailing, is that greater than other wage? But what this is for a region, it is finding what the baseline wage should be to pay in the contracts that the county has with organizations. And construction is really where we're starting. This is also something that Virginia law hadn't allowed for a number of the past decades. And we recently received greater authority. And so Arlington is moving forward and starting with construction contracts, but being ready in the future to go to additional county contracts and saying, for those contracts, we should pay people a baseline, a floor that is an adequate wage. And that's what this first step is to focus on construction contracts. And this is a way of making sure that we don't have what's called wage theft or other steps that undermine the ability of people to make a living a wage that will work for them so that they can put a roof over their head, have food, healthcare, and the basic necessities. These contracts that the county will have going forward will have that bottom baseline or wage that is acceptable. And that's the process that we started. But I know, Christian, you've also worked on this in different contexts, and I'm sure you'll have additional thoughts.
Oh, yeah. It's in Virginia, a state not very friendly to labor, also not very friendly to just overall job quality. And so in our state, we as a county government, when we put things out to bid, when we seek contractors, vendors to do any of a variety of government services, we actually have to make awards based on the lowest and most responsive bids, which means we can't factor in other things that we may like or not like about a particular vendor's operations, which can mean that you can engage in business of awarding public funds to people who are going to drive down wages, commit violations like wage theft, misclassification, and you really don't have any window into whether or not that's happening. So you, in effect, as the government, could be a contributor to downward job quality, which is just fundamentally, I think, contrary to the values that we have on the board. So, prevailing wages just say, hey, let's take an annual survey of wages that people who are doing these jobs get. And you as a county can require that those who bid on your contracts pay that prevailing wage to do, in this case, construction. And what we're trying to figure out is what's the threshold level to implement this prevailing wage requirement because it certainly will require a new form of administration and enforcement and compliance. So we still have some things to work out, but I think the principle, as the chair said, absolutely where we need to be.
We've been getting a lot of emails into the county board office, which come to no surprise to either one of you or anyone who attended our recessed meeting on Tuesday. And those emails are surrounding the Serrano Apartments and the situation going on there. And we got an update from both staff and the manager, as well as from the AHC board. And then there was a rather lively discussion surrounding the apartments, but give me the kind of a breakdown of where the situation there stands right now and what the board has directed AHC to do in the coming weeks and months.
Well, we have said that the conditions, the living conditions at the Serrano are not acceptable, and they need to change. And so we're focusing, we're trying to make sure that we're focusing AHC's full attention and resources, as well as our county government's full attention and resources, to correct short term so that our neighbors live in a safe and habitable place. And so that's that we had two parts to our conversation. One was about those conditions, and that was by far the bulk of the conversation. And we also had a part of our conversation on a finance agreement, which we were in the position of having to take action on. So we sought to gain accountability and have a conversation with AHC about what we expect and what is right for our residents. And I think each of us was pretty clear that things have to change and have to change quickly. And that speed of responding to the needs of our residents is a lot of what the conversation was about. There have been, it's just a matter of public record, there have been changes at AHC, and that's pure public record, but the CEO is retired and the head of the management company has left. But there are additional steps we need to see because we have to really address the needs of some of our residents who are most vulnerable and need good living conditions at the Serrano. So that was a significant part of the conversation. And then, of course, the financial part we can get into a bit more. But it was that financial part is also necessary so that we can help the 280 units, the residents in the 280 units at the two Serrano buildings.
And on that note, one question we did receive is why the board would agree to this subordination agreement in the financing when there are such dire circumstances with the Serrano.
And, one of the hardest things is that we're often dealing with nuance when, for many people, things are black and white. And it is certainly black and white that the way people are living at the Serrano is unacceptable and needs to be fixed. So therefore, the question that falls to us is to figure out how's the best way to do that. And as we looked at 1,000,001 options in an effort to try and force action that would benefit the residents, we realized we didn't really have any levers that could do anything other than penalize the very people that we're trying to help. And this subordination agreement, which is essentially allowing AHC to update their financing and get the necessary capital to make long-term repairs. If we didn't do it, then we would effectively be subjecting all of those 280 households to the fairly imminent risk of living in a building that goes into foreclosure and being displaced and are not having any affordability on the future building, as well as having the really sunk costs of the already $16 million that we've invested in it. So none of those were good options at all. And in effect, by updating this agreement, we were able to negotiate some very clear actionable steps from AHC on how they're going to handle the Serrano moving forward, and we've made it possible for there to be the capital resources for them to make the long-term repairs.
And then just to kind of wrap things up, we did not have questions about this, but I would be remiss if we didn't talk about the fact that the board approved a memorial plaque for our colleague, Erik Gutshall. Matt, I know you had some thoughts on that.
Sure. I suspect all of us on the board and all of us really in county government had thoughts about this. This was a preliminary step. We are going to have a longer ceremony where we seek to honor, and there'll be more of us who gather to honor Erik Gutshall. But this was a preliminary step that the county board needed to take in order to be able to put this plaque and this space really in the park, in the Lyon Park community. And so we took that step, and certainly I think all of us, as we weighed a lot of these issues about the future of Arlington County, thought about and think about Erik's, his signature phrase, "I can focus on the future." And it's almost a call in a way to be thoughtful. He was so thoughtful and so compassionate. And so this is an important step that we spend a little time on, but in the coming months, once we put this up and have this gathering really of our community, there will be more to say on that. But I know that each of us, and really, I'm sure you'd have thoughts as well, Christian, and you also, Kara. This is we need to remember this extraordinary person who was so indicative of what Arlington should be about. And so I'm sure, Christian, you'd have thoughts too, but I was glad we took the small step. We'll take others in the coming months.
Yeah, very, very few things that we do come with no controversy and just gratitude that we're able to do it. And this is one of them. And I think Erik himself would love and be so humbled and honored at being permanently remembered in his neighborhood of Lyon Park. In Zitkala Shah Park that is focused on the future. We reject the names of the past and we're focused on the future. I think that's just such a suiting honorific and one that I hope his family is quite proud of.
Okay, and on that note, we will come to an end to this month's County Board wrap-up. And remember, if you have questions for us after a board meeting, let us know. Email us at countyboardwrap@arlingtonva.us about an issue that's important to you, and we'll try to answer your questions. And of course, you can always find out about these and other topics by visiting the County Board website at arlingtonva.us and searching County Board. We hope you'll join us again next month as we're back in the studio for the very latest on important board actions and more. I'm Kara O'Donnell, and we'll see you then.